me to tell me I'm coming late.
She is
She has
a
yours.
texter. We should wait on her. Well, let me just get myself along. Close by.
Okay.
So, Ms. Wade says she's close by. I'll give her a couple minutes.
Okay.
I left my water bottle in the car. Oh well. Oh well.
Thank you.
Well, I know Ms. Wade will be joining us soon, but we'll go ahead and get started. We'll respect everyone's time, so we'll get started here at 4:32. And I will call our meeting order and turn things over to you,
All right.
Dr. Lovelady
Thank
Mitchell.
you. Good afternoon, Chairperson Ross and trustees. We have the pleasure of offering at least 4 to 5 different topics tonight. And before we get started with those, we always try to align our activity to our strategic themes and priority scholar outcomes, which you'll see on the screen, as well as our theory of action or theory of impact. And so you'll see that in the agenda, and perhaps you've already perused some of it. And so here are some of the topics to drill down for tonight. And instead of Chairperson Max Young speaking to the Instructional Council, tonight it'll be Jen Brock who will join me up here briefly. But we have some celebrations relative to resurrecting and reimagining our HBCU efforts and initiatives. So you'll hear a little bit about that. You'll hear how we are tightening up some of our structures and processes because we're not happy with where we are, and how this is a historical item or variable, but how we're operating now in terms of interrupting and addressing those things. So you'll see some state assessment data. Then you'll hear about one of the systems that we think will be highly impactful district-wide and how we are starting to root that, ground that level set related to our multi-tiered systems of support. We'll move into the Montessori reflection and forecasting, and I know Trustee Wade is really intrigued about this one, so I hope she makes it here by then. And then lastly, we'll talk about next steps, some of the topics that we want to forecast and get into in the future, and I know the absentees from last night is something that was mentioned already today. So we'll talk about that as well. So this is a forecasting of what's to come tonight and some of the aligned strategic themes. And the first person that will join us is Jen Brock, who is one of our curriculum supervisors and specialists. I think she's, yep, there she is. And so she'll come join me and share some information. You want to grab that?
Well, hello, and thank you for allowing me to give this update. So Instructional Council had their first meeting on October 19th. Our chair for this year is in the hands of GREA, So Max Young and Jennifer Loudon both co-chair for that. We had kind of went through introductions because we do have some new GREA members that are part of the instructional council. But then we got to some new business, and so our two topics were the personal finance and a new course with social studies that's being offered, history through media. So those were our two topics. So taking a look first at personal finance, we had Amy Pony come in, and she talked about the variety of ways that the personal finance can be offered to students, as it will now be a graduation requirement, beginning with the class of 2028. So the class of 2028 needs a half credit of personal finance. When and how this course is offered can be adjusted to meet the needs of students on a building-by-building basis. There's a syllabus being drafted for one semester personal finance course and revising the year-long financial literacy syllabus that has already been in our district. So we have a financial literacy course that is a year-long that will still be offered as an option for the fourth-year math credit and can fulfill the new graduation requirement. A one-semester personal finance course is being developed. The state law says it must count as either a 0.5 math credit or a 0.5 credit for world language or a 0.5 credit for visual, performing, or applied arts, or can be fulfilled by MDE-approved career and tech educational programs. So there's a lot of ways that this can be credited to. So they're really thinking about what that might look and who would be able to teach that course. So econ, business, education, math, social studies, life and career skills, but should be chosen based on the emphasis within the course. So if the course content focuses on economic systems and finances in relation to economies, the teacher should hold an economic or social studies or social science endorsement. If the course content focuses on concepts of math, numbers, and math logic, it applies to finance, the teacher should hold a mathematics EX endorsement.
Now, excuse me.
Yeah.
Is this financial literacy class, is that required, or it's just an option as their fourth year of math or whatever they want it to be?
So right now, it's just an option.
An option.
And soon it will be, well, for the 2028, it will be required.
Okay, so that personal finance class and the financial literacy, they're the same thing?
Yeah, I think so, pretty much. It is.
Just a different name, huh?
Yeah. So the next steps will be having discussions with district and building leadership to decide which configurations of the courses need to be offered in each building for the fall of 2024 scheduling processes.
Are there standards for that? Because it seems like such a wide variety of ways to approach it. I see Amy saying yes.
Yes,
behind
yes,
you.
there are standards.
Okay. There's a very wide
Yeah,
variety of ways to approach it.
yeah, and that was kind of what the discussion at our meeting was all those variety of ways and how, best to support and align that for students and teachers, so.
And maybe one of the things we can do is continue to bubble up the themes from that meeting and talk about the standards a little bit and then share ultimately where we land in one of the upcoming meetings. So I'll put that on one of the next topics too.
And then we heard from me with the social studies world language history through media. So this is a course that's being offered at UPrep. They had a hole in their schedule and they needed something. So this was a course that we kind of spent some time on to take a look at, but it's still in the works, so we still need some conversation about it. So the course looks at how media tells history and if that telling is accurate or if viewers should be guarded based on what media is saying about history. The course looks at how media uses history to advocate for social justice. There are 8 questions that guide this course. These questions help scholars view media through a critical lens from perspective, audience, and truth-telling. There were some reservations when we kind of looked through what had been written. For instance, the teacher uses a waiver, but we kind of wanted to take a look at that waiver for, is this acceptable for all students? And then DVD streaming. So, or DVD to streaming. So right now they're using DVDs, but DVDs are going away. So how might we make sure that we're not, doing anything against licensing, with streaming videos? Making sure that the course is very diverse, and then flush out units with day-to-day lessons. And then how might we make this course accessible to other schools outside of UPrep? So we're going to continue to create that curriculum and then, again, bring that back to make sure that we have met all of those conditions there. And then before adjourning, we then collaboratively looked at when we would like the rest of our meetings. So we did plan out for the rest of our meeting dates, and those should be listed on the notes there.
All right, I guess you got your questions out of the way. All right. I mean, not really a question. I just find it very interesting that visual and performing arts could be an umbrella for this personal finance piece, but, you know, hey, I don't make the law, so. So, all right, thank you.
Are you guys keeping up with, like, I think you had some pilots going too. The instructional council was kind of seeing over, there was like an AP class. Like there was science piloting as well going on. Is that still right? Or is that maybe not instructional council's purview?
As the pilots come through, so typically in the instructional council, we'll hear back. So we've heard on the different curriculum that's going to be used. We've heard on the curriculum that was written. And then what happens is then teachers will teach that for either the semester or year, depending on how long that was for the pilot. And then they'll come back and give us some feedback. So once they've had, if the pilot was a semester, we'll hear back from them around February, March. And if it's a year-long pilot, they have until the next school year to do
Okay, so it wouldn't be not
So
much longer.
upcoming.
I think you're also thinking about our new science curriculum
There's that,
supervisor, and there was
AP
a,
something, 'cause my
and so
son's in it.
let's add that to the future
Sure, yeah.
topics in terms of
Nothing
getting Jessica up in front with Jonathan, and then we can drill down a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, as I mentioned, one of the, topics that we want to resurrect, because it was in the district before, and with COVID, many things kind of was suppressed because we were in this new format, and the demand is still there in terms of exposing our scholars to historically Black colleges and universities. And let me invite executive directors Bridget Cheney and Kurt Johnson up. And so while we are thinking about this in particular relative to historically Black colleges and universities, and certainly don't want our scholars to have to travel outside of our district to be exposed or to deepen their opportunities, for something like this, we have really been grappling with system-wide P through 12. How do we build this into our college and career readiness? And so this is just a slice of that work, but it's a very important slice because of the historical significance of HBCUs. And so with that being said, go ahead and drive and take it away.
The connections between HBCU, I'm going to say more than tours, but experience, right, throughout. And our strategic themes certainly are meeting our holistic scholar needs and ensuring equitable access and outcomes. And in particular, the priority scholar outcomes that we believe that'll be positively impacted with this certainly is an increase of empowerment, belonging, and agency, right? Giving scholars something to hold on to that's theirs, to have choice about, and really just uplift and shout their voice loud. So also successful transitions from high school to college or career, and making sure that we have a lot of wraparound services, not only for as they go through high school, but then what does that first year look like out in the world at an HBCU or otherwise, making sure that they feel comfortable, supported, and want to continue, because that first year can be difficult. And then reducing Black scholars' exclusionary discipline, certainly coming around things in that way too. And where we were, I'm going to tip it over to Mr. Kurt Johnson, because Ottawa Hills High School HBCU experience is certainly something you were deeply involved in.
Yes, I'll just say connection to the strategic themes. Also, the HBCU experience really kind of highlights and emphasizes some of the culturally affirming environments. And so when kids get a chance to experience those college campuses and that landscape there, seeing people like themselves, talking to people like themselves. We do deliberate, intentional activities to integrate with the students on campus, such as eating in the dining hall, talking with the students, seeing what dorms look like and those sort of things. And so kind of integrating that whole experience there. And also, HBCU do a focused effort on first generation college going students there. So again, they're interested in getting kids who are first generation college going there. So in the past, we've done, I don't have that focus there, and we did a variety of tours there. And so we want to kind of revamp or relive and resurrect those experiences because they were valuable.
And our HBCU team is listed here. Lots of representation, cross-role groups, cross sides of town, all sorts of things included in this team. And one name that is not listed here because we just roped her in last minute, intentionally, Kenyatta Hill Hall. So I didn't put her on here before because I didn't want to force her into anything, but she has agreed, and that'll be great. So she is also part of the team. We really wanted a cross-sectional team because it lends for depth when we're thinking about what this experience can be, and also for sustainability purposes, knowing that it has to live beyond one or two people.
Mhm.
We want it to be very, very successful now and in the future. And so where we are, there's an exciting part coming up, so I want to zip through this slide, not because it's not important, but it is in phases. So phase 1 will be launched during the fall of the 23-24 school year right now. And by launching it, we know that there are some college expos that are happening. Detroit, that's the next slide. That's why I want to hurry because it's awesome. And Chicago State Black College Expo happens in the spring, but we're preparing for that now and making sure that we're having the conversations and getting the bus ready, the coach bus ready, and determining what this year's HBCU tour will look like. Where is it going to be? South, east? We don't know, right?
Yes,
So,
a little bit of conversation with the committee, and trying to map out things that are going to be really effective and realistic geographically, because we have to map out points A, B, C, and then back to A in different parts of the country. So we try to get 7 to 8 schools on a particular tour.
the next couple of points here, monthly scholar and parent gatherings, and then the HBCU alumni mentoring that'll happen monthly. Not that we won't have some of that this year, but it won't be fully embedded and baked into the program certainly until next year. And then this is where I wanted to head, so this is super exciting. September 30th, we had a group of 21 scholars from UPrep and Ottawa Hills High School. We will certainly expand it district-wide, but wanted to get our feet a little bit wet first to make sure we knew what we were doing. And so went over to Detroit to go to the college expo over there. And out of this group here, which they had a great time and everybody had a wonderful day, out of the 21 scholars, let me see if, here we go. I love the picture, so I could have stayed there, but I'll miss some of the good points here. 9 scholars were accepted on the spot because they take their transcripts with them and have the conversations with admissions specialists and things like that. 3 scholarships were awarded in the amount of $1,000, $1,000, $7,000. 2 sophomore scholars were told they would later be accepted as juniors. So they had what looked like great things and all of that, but just needed a little more time in school, that's all. And this speaks to what we were talking, what we were talking about a minute ago about the mentors, because what we know between now and the 9 who were accepted on the spot and the scholarships and things like that, and the 2 sophomores too, we don't want them to lose interest, because it's fun to say yes that day and then what? So we're going to expedite finding mentors for those who have applied and accepted or not, because there were others that applied and they may not have been accepted, but that's a yet, not accepted yet. And how do they have wraparound support to get them to and through the finish line of HBCU attendance? So we're very excited. This is an informative piece for Mr. Johnson and I, but certainly a celebratory piece too. So, yeah. ways you can help us, please amplify the HBCU opportunity for our scholars. And if you know of any support that could be lent, we would love that. And continue to support the scaling of the initiative, because we know it's great to have in 2 high schools, but certainly great across the city as well. And then, what would you add?
I'll just say, the intent is to scaffold it from elementary to high school. Most of the HBCU, pretty much all of them, do a really good job of providing virtual tours so that we can expose kids as early as elementary and middle school before they actually go on physical tours. So we get them exposed to what's available out there.
Yeah, let me just add this before we open it up for questions. I can't underscore enough how this is a resurrecting, because a body of work has lived in the system for a long time, and because of COVID and other things, it phased out. And so we are deliberately trying to go slow to go fast, so we situate more scholars to benefit from this, and taking the learning and building it, baking it into our systems, so it's more accessible. So like what was already said, it's not just about that climax of going and visiting, but it's also how do we tee up so people are informed and when they're going and have all the right paperwork and complete and choose what's right for them based on budget and some other things. So what questions or concerns or celebrations might the board lift up for us?
Oh, I definitely am excited about that for 2 reasons. One, I went on we call the Black College Tour back in the 90s. I went in the 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, I believe. And so we've seen east all the way down, all the way to the bottom of Florida. Even took us to Bahamas on a cruise at the end. So, if y'all go all the way to Florida, you got to do that too. I'll tell you about it. But also,
That's what
I was a chaperone as well. I chaperoned in 2000. I know I was actually a student, and I was a chaperone in like 2010 and 11, I think I went. So, and I've been having conversations with my organization about bringing that back. So I'm going to talk to y'all offline, because I don't want to do work that I don't have to do. So that's the other reason why I'm really excited to hear about it. And so I'm ready to partner with that as well. Thank you.
I mean, what you just said, though, is, how often we talk about some scholars don't get to travel outside of this region, let alone like their neighborhood. And so what you just highlighted is it's an opportunity related to college and career, but also world and life.
We did a lot of historical tours as well. Like I went to Battle of Gettysburg. Like I was so excited to have came back to history class. I was like, I went there. Like I stood on the battleground, and I was like so connected. So it was a lot of things in that, especially the East Coast, that we could take our students to. That is not all about just the HBCUs, and and some kids do choose those schools, and they've never been there. Like my daughter is in Texas, in Houston at Texas Southern, and she's never been in Texas before. And I'm like, so you think you might want to go there first to see how you like it? And so we were fortunate to visit, but not everybody is. And so they show up in this place so far away, and they're there now, so I'm excited about helping make that happen.
We do build in what we call enrichment experiences that will take in museums and historical sites in the area, whether it's the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C., the churches in Alabama,
Yep.
but all the historical site plantations that are now museums, we take in, so we kind of build an experience on and off campus.
And there's, history in our city of doing those things, and all those places still exist. So hopefully we can get access to some of those tours that happened in,
Like we had one chaperone already.
I know. That's
Our way. And sign her up, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. I didn't really have any questions. I think as a HBCU alum myself, I guess I just definitely want to, uplift some of the unrealized opportunities that come from attendance. Just the support, the familial atmosphere. Coming from Grand Rapids, if I was coming from Grand Rapids, I think there are probably some healthy culture shock moments associated with it as well. And then I think too, just a sense of confidence that comes from, seeing an organization, an entity be effectively run, operated, and populated by, you know, folks that you don't necessarily see doing those things every day. So I think there really just some unmeasurable, I guess, growth opportunities that come from it. So just excited that we're resurrecting this, and, you know, excited for the folks that get a chance to benefit from it for sure.
Thank you. Looks like we have a mentor too.
Oh.
Chaperone. Okay, keep going. No, I'm just kidding.
That too.
Okay, thank you. So while, thank you. So while some of our leaders are coming to the table, Steve Petros, Jonathan Harper, Eric Harmson, I'll say this. We are entering the state assessment data, and as we continue to grapple with it, we are not happy with it and continue to take strategic efforts related to our continuous improvement. And one of the ways that we have tightened up in particular is even looking at something as, people might say, as small as schedules, but as significant as schedules in terms of the use of instructional time audits, as well as transition time, sponge activities, things like that, and have had some really good conversations with principals and our coaching so that scales to staff. So all of you made it. I will turn it over to Steve to kick it off.
Thank you so much.
Jonathan, you have space down there? We can move over a little bit. Okay.
Just trying to not be too close to me.
It's great to see all of you again. Good evening. Over the course of the next few minutes, we're just going to kind of highlight some of the results from our Spring 23 state assessments, and specifically I'm referring to the M-STEP and the College Board accountability assessments that were administered from roughly mid-April through May up until the Memorial Day holiday. Roughly a 6-week period covering grades 6 through 8 plus 11.
What was that called again?
The assessments,
Yes, the one you just,
M-STEP,
and the other one?
the SAT.
Oh,
I think I said College Board.
okay, okay.
The College Board has a suite of assessments that cover grades 8 through 11, but only grade 11 is actually used for accountability purposes, and it's publicly reported. So before we get into the data, just want to kind of touch upon or make some connections to our scholar priority outcomes. Specifically, we're looking at the 3 priority outcomes of increasing math proficiency, literacy proficiency, and then increasing successful transitions from high school to college and career. We've got a handful of themes that are also aligned to this work. I think most of all, theme 4 with respect to curriculum, and these state assessments can really report out the extent to which our scholars are engaging in, embracing the curriculum, and really acquiring those skills and knowledge that are outlined and identified in our curriculum. And just to kind of set the stage further, here in GRPS, as in most districts, we have a balanced assessment system. We have tiers of assessment that our students, that our scholars participate in. Going from the top down, if you will, the formative assessments, these are really not assessments that are given or administered, but they're instructional moves that happen in the classroom. It is the interaction between the teacher and the scholar, with the teacher by and large responding to student needs based upon cues or processes or practices that are happening in real time during the instructional process. Bless you. Classroom assessments. These are high frequency and really high levels of feedback. These are great sources of feedback for our teachers to gauge where our scholars are in the moment or within kind of short-term periods, a day or a couple days, maybe a week. District assessments, or sometimes called interim assessments, or sometimes benchmark assessments, it's kind of used loosely. Those are periodic. In the context of GRPS, you hear us reference map growth, map reading fluency. Those are probably the 2 most popular interim level assessments. And then today, I'm going to just share results on the state or the annual accountability summative assessments. These are once a year assessments, and these really provide feedback to you, to the board, to the superintendents, to district leadership, school leadership, policymakers, parents, and the public. It's a snapshot to reflect or to report the extent to which groups of students are acquiring or being proficient on a set of skills and concepts. think I actually just spoke to some of this. Again, state summative accountability assessments are for not so much feedback at the classroom level or at the institutional level. So let's jump in. This first slide, or this slide, actually demonstrates ELA in grades 3 through 7. And you see groupings of 4 bar graphs: light green, blue, yellow, and dark green. And those reflect the spring assessment periods of 2019, 21, 22, and 23, respectively. Just to add some more context for you, think of the light green on the far left of each cluster as being the last pre-COVID administration. The blue from spring of 21 is the first post-COVID administration, but I want to put a little asterisk by that because it was not required by the state. It was certainly encouraged, but there are no accountability measures. And statewide and roughly here in GRPS, we had about 60%, maybe 2/3 participation. If you look around the state, some districts were in the 90s, others were in the single digits, but here locally, we had roughly 2/3 of our students participate. So although I display it in this slide, we don't use it for any type of reporting or evaluations. It's just a data point. Probably most what we want to focus on today are probably 2 things: just kind of the 1-year shift from the yellow to the dark green from 22 to 23, and then also maybe looking at how our current cohorts of scholars doing compared to the last pre-COVID cohort. Meaning, let's compare the dark green in 23 to the light green in 19. And looking across this 5-grade band, if you will, you see a lot of variation. I mean, for example, in grade 3, you see that our last cohort of 3rd graders is 8 percentage points behind the pre-COVID cohort at 28%. But in other areas, we're actually exceeding. Perhaps not by much, but even looking at 4th grade, our current 4th graders are just 1, but still more than the last cohort pre-COVID. You can see from grade to grade that the differences kind of bounce around and they tend to be pretty slight. We go up a point, go down 2 points here and there, but pretty much we've been in the mid-20s for most of these grades for the past 4 to 5 years. I do also want to note that this is really balcony level, high level data. It's not providing any real discrete, actionable classroom level instructional feedback. Again, it's intended to give feedback more to the institution and institutional leadership in terms of perhaps resource allocation. On the math side, across the board, the numbers are a little bit lower, but we also see some similar moves. For example, in grade 3, you can see last spring's cohort was at 18% in terms of their proficiency rate, which is similar to the year before, but certainly lower than pre-COVID at 27. It's on our radar, certainly, and we're continuing to look not only at these annual assessments, but also our interim assessment data, and most important, our classroom assessment data, and tightening up practices with respect to that more high frequency, high feedback level. I'm going to jump here to science. As a reminder, for M-STEP science, this was first administered in 2021. We've got our next-gen standards. We were still in the pilot phase earlier. I wouldn't put too much weight into the green because that was spring of 21 when we had low participation, but we can certainly look at just the 1-year movement from spring of 22 to spring of 23. We slipped by a point in 5th, we gained a point in 8th, and we had a nice a 4-point jump for our high school juniors with a few seniors as well. As for social studies, I just want to kind of remind you about the comments made just moments ago about scheduling and instructional time and instructional minutes. And we've had conversations recently around the amount of instructional time or instructional minutes at the elementary level, especially in the context of social studies and science. Whereas, and I'm looking at the 5th grade cluster on the left, and noticing those single-digit proficiency rates. Once you move into the middle school and high school level, then you actually have courses, full courses, as roughly a 1/6 of the instructional day dedicated to social studies, and we see how that increased instructional time has a positive effect on outcomes. Jumping to the high school level, for our juniors, our high school 11th graders, this graph shows the percent of scholars that are meeting the college readiness benchmarks. And just to bring your attention to the far left, those results in 2013-14 and 14-15, that's from the ACT. And then in 2015, the state stepped away from ACT and adopted a contract with the College Board for the SAT as the college readiness test as part of MME. So that explains the break between 14-15 and 15-16. Looking at the colors, the burgundy on top reflects the percent of scholars meeting the college readiness benchmark for evidence-based reading and writing. Roughly, we've been bouncing just above or below the 40% mark. But if you look to the far right, you'll see that we had a really nice gain from last year to this year, from spring of 22 to spring of 23. Running roughly parallel to that, but down a little bit, you see that we have, for our mathematics and also for our composite, we've been kind of just above or below the 20% mark. But again, over to the far right, you'll notice that both mathematics scores and the composite for math and reading combined took a nice increase. And certainly we're hoping that our practices from last year will continue. We'll continue to tighten those up, make those more effective and efficient, and see that trend line continue upward for the years ahead. So some ways that we're hoping that you can help assist us in further operationalizing our strategic plan in the context of these state assessments. You could amplify the gains that you see in our data. For those areas that you see that we are moving upwards, for example, the last slide with our SAT results, shine a light on it and let's amplify that. Let's continue to support our amazing teachers and the work that they do in the classrooms. It's a heavy lift. They have a lot of responsibility and it's tireless work, and yet we are thankful and grateful for their efforts every day. Please continue to advocate for our leaders. Again, tireless leaders, tremendous amount of responsibility on their shoulders. You know the work, Ms. Melton, and we appreciate the work that all of our building principals and district leadership do as well as those that are in succession planning, if you will. We are certainly building a strong cadre of assistant principals and bringing them into leadership roles as well. Again, state assessment data is really intended for you as one of the primary beneficiaries or recipients of the data, and we are hoping that you will continue to support our work in promoting our ongoing efforts to tighten up, and you hear that phrase often, our instructional practices as we reflect upon and respond to this data as well. I think that closes that chapter. What questions can I answer for you?
I don't have any questions.
You know, I have questions. It's so hard. So, I mean, so we can see year after year that the longer students are in our system, the less proficient they're performing. We can also see that our kids take PSAT after PSAT, and yet their scores go down in the SATs. And that's not the case in most other districts. So you rightly said, Steve, that this is institutional feedback. So it's the people in this room, literally this room, and a couple others that are responsible for the shifts. So I'm wondering what can we point to as the board that's happening as an institution to respond to this data? I mean, that's things like curriculum, contracts, job descriptions, systems. That's not instruction. So it is a hard question. I know it's not a comfortable question, but that's our purpose here, is to respond as an institution. So what can we point to, and then also how can we help I can think of some things, but how can we help so that it is an institutional response rather than leaving this on the weight of our kids and our teachers?
I'll start with one example that's already been referenced once, then I'll pass it on to my colleagues if they want to chime in as well. Earlier, we talked about instructional time, instructional minutes. So one thing that we've been discussing most recently is really kind of shining a light and putting a magnifying glass on some of our schedules at the classroom level and at the school level, and perhaps even system-wide, and looking more carefully at where does the time go? And can we be more effective or efficient in ensuring or tightening up, maximizing instructional time and minimizing perhaps transition time or other aspects of the school day, roughly 7 hours, that are not instructionally focused? It's just one approach.
Let me take it. So we might slightly disagree a little bit. And the part where we agree is that it is certainly a structural component, a systems component, and then certainly building level in terms of school level leadership, as well as what happens in the classroom, as well as caregivers. It's a whole system. And so from a structural and systems level, I think that you have noticed that we have started to allocate different resources, whether it is doubling up on mental health aspects or adding administrators to help us in terms of our school tours, the coaching, looking at the data to really drill down and intervene where intervention is needed. At this level, the folks in the room drilling in on how we do school visits, what we're looking at, our artifacts, how we are coaching around that. And so really, I'm going to use a phrase, theory of action. Theory of action is what we were doing. We've moved to theory of impact in terms of how are we having impact in our coaching and our one-on-one sessions and getting into the building, the artifacts that we look for, the 7 ingredients, how the reason why E.D. Hermsen is here, the PD that's aligned to the data that tells us we need to go deeper or scale it, as well as some of the different supports for curriculum. And so one of the things that I say a lot, given my newness here, is that GRPS moves like a bullet train. Yeah. And so it also has been creating the system of SWAP and SWIL, formerly academic team, but changing it to SWIL to anchor identity, system-wide instructional leadership team. So how are we acting in ways that impact the whole system and then drill down? And then how are we utilizing our data cycles at that level, and then hoping that that scales in our theory of impact to principals, department chairs, scale up and down. Our SWAPs is another structure, system-wide action planning team. So it's aligned with our strategic plan to say, hey, this is a problem. And because this is a bullet train, and that's not to be disrespectful, we just move fast because it's a big system. Well, let me not say big. I try not to say big because I don't know that it's big anymore. In some ways we have been loose, but we have been tightening. And so SWAT means once we identify something that's out of alignment, that we want alignment with our strategic plan, pulling that apart to say this is what it is that we're grappling with, getting different people top down, sideways on those teams to slow it down and diagnose, and more importantly, create some action steps. So 2 examples would be whether it's our leading the GRPS way, leading the GRPS way, which is our principal convenings. How do we tighten up what we're talking about there to help hold space so our principals are listening to one another? Because that's another form of professional development related to, I'm struggling with this, and now you don't have to feel shame, but you can talk about that and get some PD that way. Holding space for them to then talk about how they're entering one another's buildings to build capacity, and then just talking about effective practices. And one of the practices and systems is, again, that tightly aligned PD related to teaching works. So how are we scaling the highly impactful adult behaviors that we know shape this data right here? So our theory of impact is once we hear that, what are our look-fors and artifacts at this level? What is theirs at the principal level? And then on and on and on, always eyeballing our scholars, what they're doing, but us being very clear about our unit of study. The other thing, or system, structural, is our deliberate interactions with parents. Because if we act like we alone in this room are the only influencer of this, we are dead in the water. And so how are we engaging with families also to build capacity, whether that's through literacy, or you talked earlier, Trustee Lewis, about absenteeism. How are we partnering? Because when, I don't need to finish the rest, when kids aren't in front of aren't engaged in the learning, aren't present, that also is a loss. And so there are many structures. I hope that we can, it's not a hope. I know that we are trying to plan out the rest of the year in terms of the systems and structures that we're putting in place. And there are a lot of topics, so we'll continue to build them in. Let me pause for a second. Are there other things that you all want to share relative to your slice of the pie? And when I say their slice, they know that we're all district employees. There's one district, and yet there is a slice that they get to shepherd, and we have their back in terms of doing that. So what else might you lift up, if anything? And don't feel forced to just say anything. Share what's most on your mind.
Thank you, Dr. Lovelady. You mentioned teaching works. I was just going to say, really focus on core Tier 1 instruction, right, and looking at instructional practices and building up capacity collectively, right, of our classroom practitioners, our teachers, and also our teacher leaders and building leaders. And so just emphasizing what Dr. Lovelady Mitchell said, focusing on not just remediation, but what does Tier 1 instruction look like, and working collectively as that. We've had a great deal of focus on that in our leadership convenings, and continuing that with a steadfast approach to improve that instruction for all scholars. So.
So actually what's next is that major structure of MTSS, and how we know there's residual pieces of it in our system, but how we're slowing down and getting tighter and really trying to level set and build that out. And I'm sorry if I'm being redundant, because what we know for sure, I'm not pointing at you, by the way, because what we know for sure is that we will never intervene our way out of solid core instructional practices. And so you'll hear more about that shortly. But gentlemen, what else might you add before we turn it back over to the board?
I keep thinking about variability, and that causes inequity. So really tightening what we're doing and aligning and really focusing on what makes the biggest impact. And Dr. Mitchell says that impact. So what is our impact data? What is most important? And then how do we make sure that we have systems in place and plans in place that provides our folks with what they need, so they can provide what our scholars needs. And that's really where I'm seeing a difference, is that tightening and that creating more consistency and across and aligning. And that's the power of the strategic plan and our vision. And I'm really hopeful and excited about this work around tightening up what needs to be tightened up so that our scholars can be successful.
I would be remiss if we didn't say, and this may be one of those, growing sometimes is painful because it means letting go of what once was. And I think that has been a big push. And so there's been some grieving, but also acceptance in terms of folks know when they look at the data, and when they don't know, the team helps them. We got to do something different. But we've been engaging in PD at this level and trying to scale it, and using the phrase, let me please unpack this for a second, going slow to go fast. Going slow to go deep, but also understanding that there are kids and people, humans at the end of this. So speeding up and trying to accelerate so we can accelerate their learning. The other structure that I just feel like I have to call in the room is the communications piece of how we continue to engage with our parents and other community members, but also that human resources piece of let's not pretend. When we don't have teachers and there's a shortage, there is a problem. One of the most significant resources, and yes, again, our leadership moves shape them, but that is a real thing in terms of why we need to do the FMP also, to help right-size our districts so we have full staffs for the collaboration aspects and for the sake of having a certified teacher in front of our kids.
Right.
And you all have seen the vacancy numbers, and so the efforts around that has also been a huge shift or structure. Do you want to say anything before we kick it back to the board?
I think the only piece I want to add too is just kind of continue to bring up assessment literacy as, you know,
What
part
about,
of-
I'm sorry,
no, it's all right, go ahead.
what about teachers? Are they buying into this strategic plan? And
I think teachers are buying in, and here's the other component of GRPS, in all of the variables. I believe that the more we engage our staff, teachers, those affiliated with classrooms and things like that, it'll be easier to buy in. One of the things or moves that we're making is also reducing noise. There's a lot of noise for a lot of different reasons, and so I think we'll see even higher co-construction and buying in as we continue to say priorities, minimizing the noise, and this is how we're working together. Did I cut you off?
That's all good.
What questions or concerns or celebrations might you all have?
I just wanted to bring up a study that it's really an early child study. It's called the Tennessee study, and I read the study, and basically it said that preschool isn't working, right? But what I got out of that study was that in our lower income communities, we educate our children with such an urgency, and that our kids get burned out. And you'll see that our kids start really excited about school and passionate about school. And the more we try to force all of these things into their brains when they really just want to play, you know, they really want to have experiences, have fun, feel safe in school and at home. But that's not happening because we're having these type of conversations that are not taking care of their whole self, right, and their needs. And I think a lot of times we see that, and we see these numbers dropping as they lose interest, as they start understanding some of the troubles and the problems that's really going on in their world, in their neighborhoods, in their homes. And I just want to make everybody aware that our kids they didn't sign up to come here to school, right? I told my daughter, I celebrated you because you didn't choose to do 12 years of school. But now you're going to college and you choose that, so hey, you know, go be great. But we sign them up for this, and we know that our kids our Black and brown students, to be specific, are going to meet such great troubles and issues and setbacks that we educate them with such urgency that they can't just be children and have fun, and right? Where I've watched children in more affluent neighborhoods be educated and it's so relaxed. They're gonna get it. They'll be okay, their parents say. And I even see this in my early childhood center where my lower income moms are like, they need to know their colors, their ABCs, they need to be learning their name. And then my other parent, my doctors are coming in like, oh, she'll be fine. She'll get it, you know. And you see that and you wonder why our kids are so stressed out in school, right? And why by the time they're in the 3rd to 5th grade, they're tired and they're disconnected. And so I don't even know where have a actual point. It just needs to be said in this space that we need to take care of our whole child and their families and make school a place they want to come. And while they're here, they're having fun doing it. And while they're having fun, they're learning. And they need to know that they'll get it and they'll be okay, you know, because I know that I was tired of school by the time I got to middle school. I'm tired, like, and I know that we're teaching them out of fear of what will happen if they don't read, right? Because what is it? Prison is what they say our kids will end up in if they're not reading. And so we teach them with so much fear and urgency that we don't think they'll just be okay, they'll get it. And I just wanted to say that. It was on my heart, and I know I talk about it a lot because I just see it so much. Our kids they worn out. They don't want to take another test. They don't want to learn nothing else. It's not fun to them anymore.
Yeah, thank you for holding space for us to kind of flip and integrate some humanity in how we are talking about this. And I know the folks in the room are familiar with Dr. Bettina Love's work about joy and not just surviving, but thriving. It is why we have one of those strategic themes of holistic needs.
Yeah.
It is why we have the structure of allocating more mental health and wanting to do the right work of relevancy. And one of our key 7 ingredients is culturally responsiveness. And for us, or I'll claim it for me, so that means it's going to seep through. It is, because we talk about it, is holding space for people to feel empowered, enjoy, and liberated, which does also mean situating you to have joy and be well in life. The reading and the writing, but understanding that it's a container in a relationship. So at least I know I can speak for everyone in saying we appreciate your framing of it and willing to continue to entertain other questions or field questions and concerns. Thank you, Trustee Wade.
So, that's good.
Well, I mean, I'd like to build on that. So that's kind of what I'm getting at when I say, like, how is this system informing us, not the system, how is the data informing us about new ways of doing things? So I did, as you explained things, I heard a couple of new things that are different for GRPS. And that's kind of what I'm looking for, because this has been consistent data for a long time. And Dr. Lovelady Mitchell, you mentioned a few things where I'm like, okay, that is a different approach than we've taken in the past. But I think, just to build on what Trustee Wade said, is, yeah, how are we making this a human-centered system? How are we listening to kids and saying all these beautiful things that you guys have articulated? Are we going to those that are implementing it and saying, hey, how's this working for you? What hurdles do you still have? So in many ways, that's what I would want to encourage, and I believe that I speak for many of us on the board that says, how can we use things like the contract and job descriptions and hours and the calendar, the schedules, to encourage a more human-centered, not every second taken, but enough seconds to be human during the day as the adults and as the kids in the system, so that we can build more joy in their school day.
Yeah.
And that's more what I'm hoping is, even some of our really necessary data linear approach, how is that still being informed by the people in the system, the kids and the adults?
I'll amplify this. I do believe the structure of SWAP, which is cross-sectional with teachers and principals and other folks sitting at the table and grappling, is a way. I do think the structure of optional all-district staff meetings is a way. I heard your question last night about how has it been communicated, and again, it is something that we are going slow to launch, and so there have been emails and more mass communication, and will continue to be, but we feel like holding space in that way will allow us to break the norm of how we have done business, but hear directly from end users, to continue to talk about and grapple with priorities, and extending some grace for us to launch it in a way where we go slow, so we're learning and that it's sustainable. And so it might not be, it won't be Thursday, as painful as it is for me to say. It won't be what we want it to be in terms of our ideal state, but it is our way of moving closer to who we want to be and how we want to do business. I do think our question of the day, where we're asking questions of scholars directly and teachers and other people, a structure that will be impactful and going directly to end users and eventually scaling that out. I do think there are some structures that will influence this data. SWAP, SWIL, question of the day, let's talk, all district staff meetings, and some other things. Those are some strategies that we know that data says you can't throw everything at things. We need to at least pause, progress monitor this, see how it goes, and then continue to build out. The thing that I am most cognizant of, and perhaps that haunts me, is some of this stuff is not just about today or even the year. I've been here a year and almost 2 months. It's not even about that. Some of these things are historical, and we're trying to lean into it differently. and with urgency, but also needing some grace in terms of let's progress monitor this and see how it works. Understanding that humans are at the end of it both ways. And so I think the other thing that we need is some accountable grace and some consciousness about all the efforts. Because I will also say this, while our business is teaching and learning, F&P is a whole nother 30 jobs. And so full-time jobs plus 80 hours. And so all of it influences. And while people get paid well in this room, people are still people, and there is some accountability, trust me. You can look at them, you can ask them, there's some accountability. There's also some support, and so that tension of it.
I appreciate your answers. Thank you, guys.
Just want to repeat accountable grace. I have to write that down.
And if that goes famous, please cut it
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, folks.
Thank you.
So here's one of the other structures that we're leaning into that we know will be highly impactful because of the research and because of the lived experience of other educators, and it's the multi-tier systems of support. And Director Jonathan Harper and Executive Director Roxana Alahi will help us unpack that a little more.
All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Sir.
Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
So I'm excited about the questions that you just asked because I think it really does lend itself really nicely into the topic that we're going to dive deeper into. So we are here to talk about multi-tiered systems of supports, MTSS for short. So I wanted to make sure that we get the acronyms out of the way. We believe that this is really tied to some really significant indicators within our strategic themes. So you'll see them here. It really is about meeting the holistic needs of scholars, right? So there are, we'll get into it a little bit, but there are two sides to what we look at, both the academic and the social, emotional, behavioral. So meeting the holistic needs is really important, as we just talked about. And then to ensuring equitable access and outcomes. So we know that as we build systems, we have to look at how those are being built to ensure that equitable access and outcomes. And then lastly, that our curriculum and program opportunities are aligned to allow for that. So making sure that all scholars have that experience, that it's culturally responsive. Again, that equity, that's so important as we think about how we build our systems. So that is connected directly to this work. What is MTSS? It is really a framework. And so you may have previously heard about this in the terms of response to intervention, or RTI, but recognizing that this is a system, it's a framework that really is meant to address all scholars' needs, to both address both the academic and behavioral needs within school. And the term that you'll hear now is social, emotional, behavioral, or SEB. Again, it's kind of that same language, but just further defining what that needs to be. And it is looking at all learners' needs and providing that through that most effective instruction for all scholars. So I think Jonathan mentioned it earlier, I think it was you, Jonathan, mentioned earlier that solid tier 1 foundation, and so it will be building off of that. MTSS, you'll see this here as a wheel, and so in Michigan, you'll see that in the center of the wheel, it's the little MTSS. They've done a lot of work around this, and so what you'll see in the blue triangle, or the blue wheel fin, whatever you want to call that there, is the triangle that you're probably most familiar with seeing, and we'll get to that in the next slide here, but recognizing that within this work, it's not just that triangle, it really is all of these components that feed into the system, right, that framework. So we know we have to have that tier delivery of instruction. We know we have to have team leadership that's involved. This can't be just our voices, right? This has to be from the teacher level to the administrator level to the district level. All people have to be involved. We have to have continuous decision-making based on data. We can't just stay in one place because of that one point in time data point, right? We have to continue to revise and review and then make adjustments from there. We have to have comprehensive screening and assessment systems. So again, going back to some of the conversations we had earlier with Steve, and then looking at what does this look like as far as our implementation of interventions. So we'll get into that as we continue to build off of this.
So I mentioned you are very familiar probably with that tier, right? So you see the triangle and the different tiers. We have our tier 1, which is meant to be that 80 to 90% of students. They receive that instruction. I would say all students, really, 80 to 90% will respond to that tier 1. And so when we think about that, that is all learners. We know that if learners are not responding in that tier 1, then we have to increase both the specific targeted interventions that are aligning to that general ed and that tier 1 foundation. So we increase that support to a tier 2 intervention. And that is targeting 5 to 10% of our learners. And then if we go beyond that, we have our tier 3, which is really then targeting those most significant learners that are not responding to tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. And then beyond that is where special ed falls. And so we see, I think, as a district that we spend a lot of time maybe in that tier 2, tier 3, and we really have to strengthen that core. I know I've heard a lot of kind of funny acronyms or funny anecdotes around, like you have to have a strong core, right, in order for the rest of the body to work. So if you don't have a strong core, we know what happens as I do headstands on the weekend. Yeah, I know. You have to have a strong core for the rest of the things to work together. And so we have to focus on that strong core, that tier 1. As we've been doing this work, we know that it is not work that we are doing in isolation. We know that, again, I mentioned the state has done a lot of work, and one thing I wrote down but failed to mention is part of the work that Michigan MTSS has intentionally done over the last couple of years is really increasing and being inclusive with their language as far as being culturally responsive. So the work that has been done continues to evolve in ensuring that we are using approaches that are culturally responsive in order to make sure that we're not, to some of the points that Ms. Wade was making earlier, how are we teaching all of our learners? What does that look like? And how does that frame the work that we do? So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out because I wrote it down and didn't say it. But with that, we do have partners across the county that are doing this work, and we know that Kent ISD has a team that is specifically designated to support different districts with this work. We're not alone in this. We don't need to be alone in this, and we can learn from each other as we do it. So we have partnered with the ISD to help facilitate our next steps. So we will be doing that. We've already started that, and you'll see in our next slides here the different points that we need to work through as we think about what this will look like. So this is what they call as their arch of, or the infrastructure for implementation. And that really is, that's developed by, again, Michigan MTSS. And so we are working through this arch with the ISD to help guide us in our work. So the first step is forming a district implementation team, DIT for short, because we all live in the world of acronyms. And so we have done that. We've developed a district implementation team, which consists of district leaders, school principals, and no teachers at this point, because we want to really think about it from a district implementation team level. And so really wanting to ensure that we have the school voice, but also the district voice in there as we develop the system. Our next step will be looking at staff recruitment and selection process in order to then think about what this will look like in buildings. I mentioned earlier there are two sides, right? We have our social emotional behavioral side and we have the academic side. Data shows that focusing on that social emotional behavior, that kind of pre-learner behavior, so to speak, will set the stage for what learning needs to look like as well. So we will then be developing both at the district level and then at the school level what that needs to look like. So you'll see those two things falling together. This is not a 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year process. And so we know that we need to, as Dr. Lovelina Mitchell said, go slow to go fast. If we rush this and don't do it well, we will have another system that fails us, right? We don't want to do that. And so we know that we will need to take this in cohorts, that it will eventually be a full district implementation, but we will need to start with both those that are of priority, and we'll get to that here in just a second, and also those that are ready, willing, and able. So we will be, again, we have identified the district implementation team. we were at a point to where we wanted to start to select schools, but recognize that we need to, again, go slow to go fast and increase our learning as a district implementation team to make sure that we are all on the same page, because we are seeing just some disconnect. And so we're taking some intentional moves to slow the train down a little bit and get us all on the same page in order to keep it moving. So our intention will then be, once we're on the same page and keep that structure being developed, to then move forward with identifying schools that are ready to be able to start this work late winter, spring, in order to keep it going into the fall and next winter, and then start with the new cohort. Lastly, I want to identify just how this work will actually impact different systems that we are also working simultaneously on. So as a district, we have been historically identified with significant disproportionality of suspension of our Black and Brown scholars. The way that this is identified now is done a little bit differently. It's done through the ISD as opposed to directly the district level, but our data still shows itself, right? So if we have a problem with this over-suspending, the data shows itself and we will be held responsible for that. So we know that this MTSS work will impact that. Strongly believe that. We know that our read by grade 3 responsibilities will also be impacted by this work, because if we start to provide intervention, going back to that tier 1, we have a solid tier 1, and then layer in the interventions on top of that, it will impact that. And then lastly, we know that our CSI schools are going to be impacted by this work as well. It's been a part of the plan that has been articulated to work through and developing an MTSS structure in order to make our better outcomes for our CSI schools. And then lastly, what can you do to help us? Really, again, we believe that the structure is going to be important, as those questions that Ms. Melton was asking earlier. Those hard questions about how are we actually shining a light on the systems that we have in place, and where things are not serving our kids, right? What do we need to do different? And so we want your support by understanding the efforts to do this and do it well, and then prioritize this as a system that needs to continue to evolve over time with the right people at the table, and ensuring that we have the right voices to make that happen. Questions?
I have a question. I'm sorry. I have a question about some of those scores. Now, eventually, we break them down by school, right? And do we know that some of those schools that we were especially worried about, I think Alger and so on, do we know if there has been improvement there, that we can move out of that?
CSI status.
You're talking about
Yeah.
CSI.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about the scores that Ms. Petro spoke to before?
M-STEP?
Gotcha.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then what
Or
are they
we
looking
haven't
like
broken
at-
it down yet for that.
Every school has access to the data, and the scaling or the theory of impact is that as we talk about it, then executive directors and other folks are talking about it with principals with staff, so we do know the data. Can I tell you right now on the spot? I can't tell you right now on the spot the numbers, but we can certainly break it down and then share back out with
I'd like
you.
to, yeah. Mhm.
And the other thing is, it's a multi-year cycle. Can you speak to that, the CSI cycle, or we can wait?
Yeah, so probably would be best if we could come back together.
Let's
with
come
a
back
report.
to it, but it's not gonna, that label is there for a little bit.
Okay,
Even in knowing that data,
Okay.
it's not going away
Okay.
this year.
okay.
So, other questions, concerns in particular about this, or what?
Not concerns, just thinking, I mean, the other piece that I think is going to be essential for us is fully staffed. Like, how do we do this without being fully staffed? I can't imagine, 10 years ago it was hard and we had most of our people in place.
Yeah.
So how do we then as a board really make sure we affirm the staff that we have and make sure that they are pampered in every way we can, as well as bringing in maybe additional staff over the next year?
I
Yeah.
love for that aspect, why it's the district implementation team this year, and as we continue to think about and make moves with FMP, how we can continue to scale it out in a more robust way. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
What else were you saying? I missed it.
So, yeah, when we talk about the multi-tiered supports, I know it's probably a combination. Some things we're doing already, and probably some things that maybe we aren't doing yet. And I guess I'm curious, maybe a couple of examples, maybe one of each, if you could, just to humor me, maybe in each tier, if you have any thoughts on maybe something that we're already doing that we know works and we're looking to, scale it, and maybe maybe one thing for each tier that maybe we're considering to introduce.
I will chime in, and then I'll see if Jonathan or Dr. Lovelady Mitchell have any additional thoughts. So one thing that I know has been a history within the district and is a component of MTSS is PBIS. So let me throw another acronym, is Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports, right? And so that has been an initiative that has been embraced by the district in the past with good response. But I think with lack of attention, there's been some disconnect with it's implemented here to this level of fidelity, it's implemented here to this level of fidelity, it's implemented here with maybe no level of fidelity, right? And so this allows us to really, again, tighten our processes around what does implementation look like using some of the metrics that has been developed by Michigan MTSS. And again, this is not just a Michigan thing, this is actually a national thing. But Michigan, is helping to kind of frame that out for us a little bit deeper. And so we know that PBAS is one thing that is there, but it's kind of all over the place as far as what's actually happening in the district. As far as something to strengthen.
Well, I think along those lines too is because I would also talk about positive behavior intervention and support, but the idea of level setting, right? So then to say, because again, we have had PBIS in the system, and as Roxana mentioned earlier, that research does show that is a strong place to start in relation to an implementation of MTSS. But doing some systemic level setting to say, what is it, what are the strong practices, and what is it not? Because we also don't want to inadvertently perpetuate misconceptions or ineffective or practices, right? So that's the work that we're engaging in now with the district implementation team to make sure that if we move forward, we want to move forward in a coherent and cohesive way, right? So that there's common understanding and common language across the system as well.
Does that help in terms of answering your question? I have something, but it's not.
Yes, a good start to it, for sure.
And maybe what we can do is make sure we harvest other examples and push it out to you. But the thing that I'm focused on the most related to the MTSS in terms of what's working and what's not is, for me, I think it's been clear in auditing that there's not necessarily, when I first started, a clear understanding of the core instruction. And so engaging in this process is helping us have language and examine what is core instruction and what are interventions and supports. And how you can have a whole bunch of resources and things like that you're throwing at things, but nothing has more significant impact than core instruction. And then from there, understanding how you can strategically intervene and how that is differentiated. And so the language and the moves affiliated, which each tier I think is we have places where we do that well and other places where we are not. And so that's something that I hope that we can deepen and scale. If that's what I'm thinking about. And I think other people.
I fully agree. Yeah, I fully agree.
And I think one of the ways that it has helped us that we want to lean into more is it also is helping us decipher noise. What's noise? Distinguish from what's core and what's noise. And what's most impactful. The other piece that I will add to that is in our language and auditing and evaluating what's happening in that, sometimes we tend to talk about behavior, like surveillance behavior versus what are learning and teaching behaviors that tee up better data and results. So what I will do is I'll make a note in terms of the different tiers and bring back some more examples, but that's what I think about.
The only other thing I would add is just the intersectionality of special education, right? So we know that when we have solid tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3, we're going to have less students, scholars that are identified as needing those special education supports. And as we think about, I know a topic that I've talked about previously is, that least restrictive environment. As we are able to strengthen what happens here at this tier 1, kids are going to get what they need, right? And so it may then address that before it has to be escalated up that triangle. So I think that that's going to be, to your point, Mr. Ross, what's working and what's not. I think as we start to implement a stronger core, as well as those interventions, we'll actually see an impact on how that plays out within special ed.
Got you. And I guess since you're gonna come back, definitely what's working, what's not is interesting and insightful. I'm also, I guess, maybe similar to Ms. Melton's point earlier. What sort of new things might we be considering that we currently aren't doing for each tier? I think I'd be curious about that as well.
Yeah, and I even think something that is, it's going to sound old school, but it's new in terms of how we're tightening up. Maybe that's something I'm just playing with because, when I was a younger professional, people would say there's nothing new under the sun, and I have like, ha ha ha, that's an innovation right there. But I don't know if it's innovation or if it's resurrecting and tightening around it.
Yeah,
So this is where I'm going with that. I think that the other thing that's being resurrected and we're tightening on that might seem like an innovation is we're not doing everything. We're not bringing everything into the system. Things that are in the system are being sifted to identify that's core, that's a priority. This is an intervention, and this is an intervention for blah, like that specifically. We have diagnosed it, and so is your knee. And because it's your knee, this is the theme or the intervention or the strategy. And so while it sounds simple, I think that it's impactful. The thing that I was trying to say earlier that I may not have said eloquently in terms of the labels related to Ottawa, Alger, and campus is MDE, I'm pretty sure the cycle is like a 2 to 3 year cycle, 3 years. And so that does not just go away. I'm hoping that we can see some annual growth and data of proficiency, but even then we have to live in this for a while. And here's why, I think it really is an umbrella for all of this, because they know that for it to be sustainable and for us to truly move something, it takes time, a 2 to 3 year cycle. That's what we're leaning into also.
Thank you.
What's that?
I was telling her, I think it was, because I counted their money, because they were getting like an extra $10,000 a year for 3 years to come work at those schools, is that?
Oh.
Yeah. That's probably why they flew.
Yeah, let me make sure I understand. And sorry, I thought you were saying something and I missed something,
Oh,
so I
no.
apologize.
That's okay.
So, for example, when you're identified as a partnership school, certain resources come along with it, and so a stipend, if this is where you're going, of working in one of those schools, there's a stipend. Because what we've learned is some people don't want to work there because of the perception, not because of necessarily what's really happening there. And it goes back to your point of we have a concentrated number of humans who have been marginalized, so it comes with some extra stuff. And so there's some resources to attach to it. So thank you, and sorry if I was eavesdropping.
That's okay.
We are in front of microphones.
All right, thank you very much. Sure.
Thank you.
Guys.
This is our last topic. I'm going to ask Executive Director of Beresford and Executive Director Bridget Cheney to come up, who in the quadrants that they lead, there are Montessori schools, and this, as we approach this topic, please know that we are forecasting related to a multi-year plan and hopes, aspirations. Yes? Okay, take it over, please.
Oops,
Uh-oh.
of course. Okay, there I go. Sorry. You thought I would get it after the first time, but thanks for bearing with me. Strategic theme connections. This is so connected to ensuring equitable access and outcomes for not only our scholars, but also to make it systemic, distribute resources to schools based upon scholar needs. also theme 4, enhancing curriculum and program opportunities. So making sure that scholars experience an aligned and culturally responsive curriculum at or above grade level, that the academic programs align with college and career readiness. And then this is probably the bolded one here, expanding applied hands-on opportunities that align with scholar interests, because Montessori certainly does have lots of hands-on.
So now I'll remind everyone of the 5 core components of Montessori that has fidelity. And that's that we have trained staff in the Montessori lessons and materials, and often that training can take 2 to 3 years. That the children learn preschool through 12th grade in multi-age classrooms. Typically in the elementaries, it's 3-year age ranges. That they have access to Montessori materials as their primary instructional materials, and then our GRPS approved curriculums are the supplemental behind those. That they have an opportunity to direct their own work with some voice and choice in their work plans, knowing what they need to accomplish, what standards they need to meet by Friday at dismissal, and having large blocks of time to accomplish them. And that's what number 5 is, that uninterrupted work period. So now an update on that first core component of Montessori training. So if we look at Grand Rapids Montessori, we have 14 Montessori trained teachers, 4 currently enrolled, equaling 82% of the total 22 teachers on staff. North Park has 14 Montessori trained, plus the 2 that are currently enrolled, equaling 80% of those total 20 teachers on staff. And then finally, Ridgemore Park has 4 Montessori trained in their small but mighty Montessori, and that's of the total of 6 teachers. There's celebrations in those percentages, as 2 Grand Rapids Montessori staff finished up their training and jumped into the 14, and then 1 from North Park and 1 from Ridgemore this summer accomplished their training and graduated from it. So forecasting the next steps for Montessori, we have a Montessori Advisory Council meeting planned for November after the board announces any impacts to their Montessori schools, to create that opportunity that the Eureka Report calls us to, of 2-way conversational feedback or feed forward on those recommendations, so we can bring that back. And then continue research and exploration of the Montessori accreditation options and those multi-year pathways. There's kind of 2 major accreditation bodies for Montessori, and we need to involve our school-based teams to inform, along with district leadership, to inform which accreditation pathway we want to go down, either AMS or MACT. And then co-constructing that accreditation pathway with the representation of our key stakeholders. And then finally, develop a supportive on-ramp to training for new hired teachers and existing Montessori teachers that may not be trained yet over multiple years in a supportive way, but with the goal of accreditation of hitting 100% at all our schools.
You have to be at 100%?
We don't have to be. If we go back 2 slides, because we are at the questions point, both of the accreditation bodies like to see over 80%, that percentage over 80, before you start down that candidacy pathway. So.
And I think, in our ideal state, we want it to be closer, if not 100%, with the space for people and their humanity to take the time to get there. That's the ideal state. And we know that it's going to take some time, a little bit of time, but time for more questions.
We're to the Bridget slide.
And the reason I did this is we just talked about that today, the 80%. So I was glad you asked the question ahead of us saying that. So additional ways that you can assist us in operationalizing the strategic plan, certainly amplifying the Montessori forecast updates, even at 80%. You know, anyone that is either in a Montessori program right now as an educator or looking perhaps to be in that Montessori environment, talking about the training and making sure that they are ready for the piece of it that takes a little bit of time, right? And then continuing to support Montessori education at GRPS because it has a long and storied history, and knowing that we want to not only honor that, but grow and deepen it.
Now, are there funds to pay for people who are moving on and adding this Montessori art to their education?
Yep, when we're right in that invitation phase right now for this year's new learners that want to attain that certification. Yep, so it's of no cost to them to do it, but there is a commitment asked of 3 years after you receive your certificate.
Right, okay.
The difference training difference between Montessori and the baccalaureate teachers, is it take longer for Montessori?
I would answer that with International Baccalaureate expects you to engage in a new, smaller lesson annually, where Montessori expects you to understand the foundation from Children's House to Elementary 1 to Elementary 2, or the middle school years and the high school years in your initial, longer, deeper training, but then you don't have to circle back for like CEUs.
That is one thing I'd like to learn more about is the International Baccalaureate courses and programs and where they are and who's doing it and so on. I'd like to know that.
You think that the combining will help with the percentage of teachers? Would that increase, you believe, like if we had all of our Montessoris in one space? Would the percentage of trained teachers increase? You know what I mean?
You're coming through clearly. If we consolidate Montessori schools, might more people engage in the training? That's what I heard you saying. Is that what you're saying? Or?
Yes, and would more be trained? I don't know. I
Maybe
guess
not
it would be the
necessarily
same
more
amount of
engaged,
kids.
but
I
yeah,
mean,
with the
percentage.
combination of the teachers, increase the
Yep.
overall percentage.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
I
Wondering
think,
about the percentage.
yes and yes. I think yes and yes. And one of the things that I think would change is, in general, consolidating is going to help with bandwidth. So instead of subbing, you actually will have some planning time, and I hope that means also some bandwidth, larger bandwidth.
To take on that. Okay.
But how else might you all answer that?
No, I think that's ideally it. There would be probably more of each section, more Children's House, more E1s, more E2s for stronger PLCs and support for the younger generation teachers from the seasoned.
I think even depth of knowledge too, just having more to draw from, more experience, length of time and things like that would be beneficial certainly. So, yeah.
All right, well, I guess no more other questions. Thank you very much.
It's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, trustees, and thank you for your patience. We really are winding down in terms of next steps. We'll come back together and talk about some of the things that you brought up today to make sure we have that on future agendas, from absenteeism to better understanding the financial literacy and the standards, to inviting updates related to our science curriculum. Also heard about your desire for more on our IB programs. Those are some of the things I wrote down.
Yeah, I can share some videos on that. I just did the deep dive because my son switched to the program. I can share some good videos I found, if that's one thing off of your plate. Yeah.
Okay.
Send
Send me a link.
Yeah, there's some good ones.
I was going to bring up the suspension race. We haven't talked about that in quite a while, and I was interested in learning what those look like per school. We did get some data back in, was that my first?
Oh, maybe winter.
It was, it was in January or February for sure, but we got some data around the district-wide, but definitely wanted to look at the per school suspension rates.
Okay. Well, we will make sure we pull together the agendas and then get it back out to you. The next time we're scheduled to meet is November 21. November 21.
I'll be rolling in.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have a good night, folks.
Check.
Hey, Darren,
Not to read now.